All right, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Welcome to our Media Literacy Week launch event. We're just going to wait a couple more minutes for people to join us from the waiting room. I'm still hearing some people pinging in, but thank you everyone for joining us, whether you're joining from school or joining from home. Thank you for helping us to celebrate the 15th annual Media Literacy Week. It's a big milestone for us. And as you'll see, we have a very special guest today. So let's start with a look at a Canadian icon.
As night falls, 37 million Canadians turn out their lights and settle down for the night. But as we sleep, there's something interesting going on. House hippos have returned to Canadian homes, but they're extremely hard to spot. They enjoy admiring their reflections, hoarding socks, helping themselves to your devices, and annoying your pets. It looks like Canada has a house hippo problem. As night.
Good afternoon. I am Matthew Johnson, Director of Education for Media Smarts, and I'd like to welcome everyone to the kickoff event for Media Literacy Week 2020. We have some very special guests here today. House Hippo expert Sir Reginald Sumpbutter will wrangle us up that icon of Canadian media literacy, the North American house hippo.
Yes, hello, yes. But yes, I know you're excited. Yes, Matthew, it's wonderful to be here. And yes, these are absolutely wonderful animals. The fact that these tropical creatures could be living here under our very noses is most unbelievable.
Now that you say it like that, it is kind of hard to believe. Are house hippos native to Canada?
Well, okay. Shh. It's a bit of a mystery, actually. Yes. Our best guesses are that they were actually imported as pets from Africa in the early 20th century and went feral like parakeets in New York. No, you cannot have a parakeet. No. But we do know that in the Ice Age, there were many hippos living across places like England. So they could very well be a native species. But either way, we can now positively say that the house hippo is a Canadian icon. Yes, I know you're very proud of that.
Absolutely. Now, let's get to our first viewer letter. Catherine Trail of Lakefield, Ontario, wants to know, what do house hippos eat?
Oh, it's a very good question. It depends. African house hippos mostly eat cassava leaves. Yes, I know you don't like them. And sometimes they eat the white flies that are found on cassava leaves. No, I know you don't like those either. But in Canada, they're a bit more like mice or raccoons. They eat whatever we leave behind, like raisins or cracker crumbs. Yes, and they're very partial to peanut butter. No, you can have some later. We're busy.
All right. Next question is from Andre Michaud of Lake Mistassini, Quebec, who writes, why have I never seen a house hippo?
Oh, we get that question a lot. Well, the simple answer is most house hippos are very shy. No, I know not you. You're very brave. Yeah, but even if you haven't seen one, you might have seen evidence of one. They're pretty messy. So if you've seen a mess in your home that nobody has made, it might very well have been a house hippo. What are you doing? No, put that rubbish down. Put that candy wrapper down.
That sounds like a good excuse the next time your parents get mad at you for making a mess.
Right. Now, the other reason you may not have seen a house hippo is they usually sleep a lot and come out only at night. Yeah, I know you're tired. But they do have other nocturnal animals in your home. You know, you have cats, and sometimes you might hear them encounter one another. Yes, I know. Yeah, yes, this particular house hippo likes to bark at cats in the middle of the night.
All right, one last question. It's from Rod Coneybear of Toronto, who says, is it true that house hippos are just made up and you're actually a hand puppet?
Here, of course, that is a silly question, isn't it? House hippos are as real as I am. Oh, my name isn't Sir Reginald Sumpbutter. But of course, that's not my real name. I'm just playing a silly character and just having some fun today.
Well, thank you, Sir Reginald Sumpbutter, or should I say, puppeteer and character performer Matt Fichtner.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, this is the real me.
Well, not all is what it seems, is it? And I'm actually glad we got that previous question about house hippos being made up, because what we're really here to talk about is media literacy. More than 20 years ago, the house hippo was invented to help people learn that what we see in media, whether it's on a TV screen, a phone, a book, or a magazine, isn't reality.
Yeah, that's right. Now, even though you just saw the house hippo here on my arm, ta-da, you probably thought it was somewhat real. That's because I'm a trained puppeteer who can take inanimate objects and make them look and feel real. Now, puppets and cartoons, this is how they work. You know, they're not necessarily real, but when we see what looks like a face or a mouth moving, we can't help but think that it's real or a real person, and especially if we can't see what's going on behind the scenes and who's doing the talking, or in this case, a dog toy grunting for our hippo.
And of course, that's true of all kinds of media. Our brains think everything that we see and hear is real. And we need to remind ourselves that anything we see on a screen or on a page was made by people. When we do that, we can ask questions about who made it, why they made it, what choices they made, and how those choices make what we're seeing different from reality. That was true 20 years ago, and it's even more true now, when anyone can make and share media. Back then, hardly anyone had video cameras, and it was hard to make or share copies of anything you filmed. But you're probably looking right at a camera right now, and you might have another one in your pocket or sitting on a table somewhere near you. Matt, tell us why video cameras are so useful for puppeteering.
Well, puppeteering as an art form always was done with some sort of stage. Now, it used to be puppet theaters were little frames, kind of like why I put this little TV frame. And within this frame, I can hide myself and bring a character to life like this. So puppetry in general is usually working to some sort of theater stage.
And everything that we see in media is through a stage or a frame of some kind. On TV shows and movies, the camera only lets us see the action that's happening on the set, and not all of the lights and microphones and everything else going on outside the frame. But even a documentary or TV news has a frame, because the people who make them choose where and when to point the camera, and that's what we see. And that's another thing that's different from 20 years ago. The camera on your computer or your phone is connected to the internet, which means you could upload anything you film in minutes and anybody in the world could see it. So with my house hippo puppet, I can use the camera frame to make a video, then upload it to YouTube. Puppets and animation are actually a great way to get started if you want to make videos, because your face isn't on screen. That's good because when you post something online, there's no way to know who's going to see it. And 5 years from now, you might not want your 10-year-old self on YouTube forever. Matt, what would be a good way to get started if people wanted to try out puppeteering?
Well, like any sort of creative thing to do, the best thing to do is just try it. Now, you don't necessarily need a high-end silicone cast, hyper-realistic looking hippo puppet to do it. Something as simple as a sock, or even just your hand, you can certainly create something very interesting over time, like that. So I would simply suggest to everybody, if they really want to get into puppetry, is to try it. There are a lot of tools and a lot of tutorials online that show you all kinds of techniques.
All right, thanks. And of course, kids should remember to check with their parents or guardians before they upload any videos they make, even if it is just a puppet on screen. Now, I'm just going to ask everyone if you can have your screens in speaker view, please, not gallery view. So we're just going to see the people who are speaking, because now we're going to take some real questions from real kids. Or are they? No, they're real. Well, some of them are going to be suggestions that we suggested that kids should ask, but the kids are real. Anyway, here you go. If you have a question about puppeteering or making media, a question about media literacy or house hippos or anything else that we've talked about, you can post it in the chat. I know we've got some questions out there somewhere. So there is a little chat. If you don't familiar with where the chat window is on Zoom, it's a little word bubble down at the bottom.
Well, it's a little bit quiet there, Matthew. While we're waiting, some people might be interested in knowing how we sort of brought the house hippo back to life in this day and age. Now, the fantastic original video, of course, was a composite of stock footage of real hippos made to look like they're running around the house. We tried something a little bit different this time, and we actually, again, created puppet versions of a hippo. And the way that we did that here in my studio is we found and I created a 3D model of a hippo and 3D printed it up like this. And from this, I was able to then cast a silicone puppet like this. And I painted him up and used a lot of real hippo reference images to create him. And he's even got, bring right in, he's even got like real little whiskers sort of punched in there too. So using a lot of the modern special effects technology that we have, we were able to create something that looked realistic. Oh, here we got a question.
Yes.
Yeah, we've got a question, Matthew, from Andrew. And his question is, do house hippos roam outside? Will we have to keep an eye out for them while trick-or-treating, when it's safe to do so, of course?
I think that's a question for Reginald Sumpbutter. What do you think Reginald would say to that?
Wait, I have to get my at least my hat back on. Yeah, well, yes. House hippos do tend to roam at night. So when you are out searching for your Halloween candy, they're often looking for the scraps as well. So just be mindful when you're going around the edges of leaf piles and stuff. They tend to hang out there. You don't want to squish one of them.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Erica. She asks, how many years have you been a puppeteer?
Well, I actually started when I was very young. I started while I was still in high school, and I started working on a TV show called Under the Umbrella Tree, which was a Canadian production. And so I've been doing this for over 30 years, so quite some time.
Right. And I'm going to just show, we've got a couple of, I can show you briefly a little bit of how the hippo was done, what Matt was talking about. We've got some great shots. So here is that great picture of the hippo leaning around a door, and here is what it looked like on the set. Yep. And here is the last shot that we saw from the video, the hippo in the cat dish, or in the pet water bowl. And there is Matt with his blowing bubbles with a length of tubing. And I did want to show how a very short video that shows you how we don't need technology that advanced necessarily to make something that looks real but isn't, how so often it is just the camera frame. So watch this for a few seconds and see if you can guess how it's being done. I can guarantee you it's a lower tech solution than you think. Is he really that good at throwing markers into that teapot or whatever it is? And of course, it is just sold to us. We're convinced because of the acting, because of the performing, but also because of the camera frame. All right, so we have a couple more questions.
Yeah, we have another one from Kara, Matthew, and she asks, can the house hippo give us 2 tips we should teach our parents about how to recognize real content online?
All right, so we're actually going to be talking in the second half of our hour. We're going to be looking at exactly how we verify content online. So I'm going to hang on to that question until later on. But the 2 top tips are almost certainly always going to be find out where information is coming from and verify that source. So that's what I'm going to be talking about in the second half of our session today.
Great.
And our second question is, as a former social media staff in higher ed, what can someone who uses social media for work do to educate youth or adolescents on being safe on social media? And that's a really good question. So safe can mean a lot of different things, obviously. When we're on social media, the 2 things that we're most concerned about are how much of our own personal information we're sharing, and who's seeing it, and the contacts that we have with other people. So it's important for young people to know that anything that they share online, as I mentioned earlier, anything you share online could have a really long lifespan. And so it's important to make good choices about what we're sharing. And it's important to use the tools that social networks have to limit what we're sharing, to limit who can see what we're sharing. So a lot of social networks have audience tools that let us only show our content to certain people. But at the same time, we also have to be careful about sharing other people's content and respect when people don't want things shared. So it's a really good practice to only share when you're sure that someone else has consented to it, a photo or a post or something else being shared. And as parents, we can have a really good opportunity to model that by asking our kids, even when they're really young, if it's okay to post photos of them, because that teaches them early on that it's important to get consent. And as kids are getting older, as they're getting active on social media, we have to teach them not just to be careful about what they post themselves, but also to be careful about getting consent, making sure that it's okay with someone before you spread something that they've posted. All right, we have another question here. Do all kinds of media have a message? So as you can see, some media does have a clear message that the reason we created the House Hippo video, both the original House Hippo video that was made in the 1990s and this one that you just saw a part of, is to help people understand that they need to be skeptical of what they see online. The fact is, though, that it's not just media that has a clear intentional message like that that has a meaning. All media texts have some meaning because, as I mentioned earlier, our brains treat them as reality. And so no matter what we see in media, it tells us something about reality, whether that's true or not. So we often think, for instance, that when we see an unusual portrayal of a group in media. So when we see a movie, let's say we see an action movie that has a female lead or has a black lead, we think of that as something that has a message, and it does. But the fact is that even when it has the kind of lead that we see in every other movie, even when it's a male white lead, even when something reinforces what we think is normal, that has a message too. The message is just reinforcing normality. So every bit of content, even the most temporary content, even the most disposable content, everything has a message because it presents a vision of reality to us. And so we have to be in the habit of asking questions about all the media that we see. We have to ask, what is being presented to us as normal? What is being presented as desirable? What actions are rewarded and what actions are punished? All right, I think we have time probably for one more question before we go to the second part. Do we have any others out there?
Yeah. Matthew, I have another one here.
Great.
The question is from Catherine. What can kids do if they see something online and they aren't sure if it's real?
All right. Well, one of the first things that kids can do, of course, is to turn to a teacher or a parent or another adult that they trust to help them find the answer. Because all of us have to be able to turn to experts. As adults, we often turn to experts like fact checkers online to get answers, and kids have to be ready to do that as well. But as well as doing that, there are lots of things that you can do to verify what you're seeing online. You want to find out, again, whether something is coming from a reliable source. So you need to find out what the original source is, and you need to find out if it's reliable. There's 4 basic ways of doing that. One is using a fact-checking tool. One is tracking the source to the original. One is verifying the source. And finally, we can consult other sources. And I'll be taking a look at how we do those in the second half of our session. So thank you so much, Matt and Reginald and Hippo, for helping us out. I'm going to switch over now to the second half of our session, where we will be looking at what is real online. And here we go. So looking at the question of what is real online is something that, of course, is challenging at the best of times. And unfortunately, this is an area where a lot of people don't necessarily know what to do. And in some cases, because things have become so much more complicated in the last 20 years, since people have started teaching about authentication, people often have learn things that aren't necessarily the most useful things to do. So I'm going to start by asking people to think about, how do you think most people check about online information? How do people think that most people check out online information? What do people look for? Anyone, feel free to put your answers in the chat. What do you think people do to check? Okay, notice people check comments to see what other people are saying, is one suggestion. So this isn't necessarily what you do. This is what you think most people do. Fact check websites. Okay, Googling the subject. All right, so we're getting some good responses. I'm going to show you what we know from research that's been done over the last couple of years, where high school students, university students, and even university professors have been surveyed on how they fact check. And these are some of the things that they look for and some of the things that they've said. Now, keep in mind, this is not necessarily how you should do it. This is how people in general do it. So people tend to look for things like layout, design, and graphics. They look for something that looks like a well-made website. They look for the web address. So one of the things that people often will look for is a URL, a web address that ends in .org as opposed to .com. Some people look for websites that don't have ads because they see advertising as a sign that something isn't reliable. What the source says about itself, like the About Us tab. References to kind of standard scientific literature is one thing someone looked for. And of course, usefulness. If it provides more information relevant to the topic and how easy it is to navigate. Because most often when we look for information, it's because we're actively seeking it out. Maybe you're doing it for a class project and you want something that's easy to use. And these are what we call weak signals. A weak signal is anything that a source tells you about itself or is easy to fake. These are exactly the things I was just talking about, and this is what most people rely on, weak signals. But obviously, weak signals are not reliable because anyone can make them up. And that's the thing that's changed the most in the last 20 years, is that 20 years ago, it was expensive to make a good-looking website. It was expensive to print things. It was expensive to distribute information. Today, all of that is super cheap. So those have become weak signals. So here is an actual website that we created, and I encourage you to investigate it. I'll be showing you some screenshots of it. And this is a website for the House Hippo Foundation that is designed to have as many weak signals as possible, because you all know already, having seen the first half of our presentation today, that there is no such thing as house hippos. But the House Hippo Foundation website looks pretty realistic. It has a .org address. Now, you can get a website with a .org address for just a few dollars a year. Anyone can get a website with a .org address. It's not limited to nonprofits. It's not limited to charities. It's not limited to anybody. All you have to do is go to one of the dozens and dozens of companies that register web addresses. And if it's not being used by somebody else, then you can get it often quite cheaply. It's also relatively simple these days to make a fairly good looking website. So you can see here, This is a nice, clean looking website. It was actually made with Google Sites, which is a free tool to use, but it's got lots of things that if you haven't done web authoring in the last few years, may look sophisticated. So it's got pop-up text. You can integrate graphics. It's got a nice, simple, clean looking layout. And as you can see, it's got lots of information. So it's easy to make this stuff up, and it's easy to link out. So if it's got links here to various sources, to Wikipedia, to various other places. It's got a lot of detail, which, as we know, is something that people look for. And it's got an About Us page. That's another thing, again, that we know people look for, but it's super easy to fake. These are actually just the names of real Canadian biologists that I got from the Canadian Encyclopedia. And as for the pictures, they all came from this website, this person does not exist.com. This is a website that will make up completely imaginary, but mostly realistic looking pictures of people. And if you go to this person does not exist, every time you load it, it will make a different photo. And most of them look extremely realistic. And it took me probably 10 tries. That guy looks kind of like me. It will took me about 10 tries to get the photos that I wanted, that I felt fit the people that I was creating. Again, it's relatively easy to make convincing looking content. And one of the things that fake sources do is they mix real content with fake content. So the cover in the middle here is a real issue of National Geographic Little Kids. But you can see it's not actually about hippos, about house hippos. It's just about hippos. But when we see it in between these two other covers, it makes us think by context that it is actually about house hippos. How about this one on the left, the National Geographic, Canada's Hidden Secret? Well, again, there are lots of sources online that we can use to create something like this. So this is made by Free Cover Maker. As you can see, you can make all kinds of covers for different magazines. And here is how long it takes, or how little time it takes to make one. You go to choose the video, choose your image, and if you want, change the text. And here we have a time cover about Hippo of the Year. Just download it. And there's our cover. And it took us in total maybe 45 seconds. And there it is. Looks pretty good, huh? A lot of it, again, is framing, just choosing the right image. So that's a great question that came up, and I'm going to come to that in just a couple of minutes, but I'm always excited when someone gets to that before me. So these are all examples, again, of weak signals. So the whole point of that website, of househippofoundation.org, is as an example of how these signals are untrustworthy, because it has all of these signals that people often use. Either we've been taught to use them because we've been taught with resources that are a little bit out of date, or we just instinctively use them. But these are all things that trick us. And so this website is an example of every kind of weak signal that we could think of to try to convince you that something that you know is fake is real. So what do we do instead? We look for strong signals. Strong signals is hard to fake evidence from reliable sources. So we'll take a look at a couple of other stories about animals, and we'll try to find out in each case, using strong signals, whether or not it's reliable. So here's a story from the Knitting Space website. This resourceful primate was found knitting herself a scarf. Gorillas are known to be pretty smart primates, but who would have thought they're capable of knitting? Although not the product of some science experiment, Penny the gorilla from the National Zoo managed to pull a pretty swell surprise on her caretakers. So if we saw that in our social media feed, how would you check? Anyone, feel free to put your suggestions in the chat. Google Cam. Okay, I'm not sure quite what that means. Maybe Googling the story. Googling the story. See, Google to see if any other related articles appear. All right, that's good. So we're leaving the story right away, which is always a good start. That we're trying to use other sources, find out what other people say about it. So we could Google, for instance, gorilla knitting would be a good start. See if anyone else has covered it. Any other suggestions? Check if the image appears anywhere else in another article. All right, that's a really great suggestion as well, that we can do search for the image itself. That's built into Google Chrome. You can search by image, and there are also great tools like tineye.com that let you search by image. So there are a lot of different ways that we could do this. Ask Google, can gorillas knit? Okay. Now that's an interesting question, because maybe there have been gorillas that have knitted, but that doesn't necessarily tell us if this story is true. So here's an example of one of the steps that we recommend, and that's using fact-checking tools. Now, there are a lot of different ways that we could verify this one, but this is a good example of using fact-checking tools because it's a very specific claim that might easily have been verified or debunked by a fact checker. Now, there are a lot of different fact checkers. Probably the most famous one is Snopes, but also you can do a multiple custom search. We've created a fact checker search. It's bit.ly/fact-search, and it searches 8 different fact checkers all at once. It saves you time, and that can be helpful as well, because if there's a story that's happening in Canada, an American fact checker like Snopes may not have covered it. And it also includes both ones that focus on text like Snopes and ones that focus on images like Hoaxeye. So if we go to our custom fact checking search, we just do knitting gorilla. Our first result is Snopes. Did this gorilla learn to knit? Second result, another one from Snopes, and we see that indeed it did not. So Snopes is really good about giving you the context. They say, where did the story come from? It clearly says to you whether this is a false or a true story, and it even shows you, in this case, a distinction between the original photo and how it was altered. So again, you can go directly to Snopes, or you can go to our fact-checking search and use that. Here's another story. 2,000-year-old cat discovered etched among Nazca lines in Peru. Cats were as important 2,000 years ago as they are today, important enough to be etched into the desert among the Nazca lines in Peru. So this is one of those seems too good to be true stories. After all, that cat looks kind of like a child drew it. It's, again, would be relatively easy to fake. And the source here is called cheeseburger.com, and that's cheeseburger with a Z. So how would we check? Again, any suggestions that you have? Obviously, fact-checking tools we could use here as well, but leaving those aside. How might we find out if this is true, if this came across our social media feed? Okay, got some good suggestions here. Google the subject, see if reputable sources covered the story. Use the fact search engine. Are other news sites reporting it? All right, so really good again that we've got the idea. We're not even looking at the article itself. We're not trying to be fact checkers ourselves. We're not trying to be armchair analysts. We're relying on other sources that are experts in these things. So in this case, what we really want to do is find the original source. So if we think that cheeseburger.com is maybe not a super reliable source, we want to find out, is that where it actually originated? So here it is. This is a website that specializes in memes. You can see some of the other links here: Fail Blog, Meme Base, Geek Universe. So if this were the original source, we might have good reason to not trust it. But when we actually look, we can see the story itself came from The Guardian. And The Guardian, of course, is a reliable English newspaper. Whatever opinions you may have about its politics, they're unlikely to be lying to you about a big cat drawn in the Nazca lines. Of course, we want to follow this link because anyone can say, oh, this story came from the New York Times or this story came from The Guardian. So we want to follow the link, or if there isn't a link, we want to go to the Guardian site and look for it. And here we find the exact same photo and we see it's fundamentally the same story. So the story has been verified. Here's another animal story. National Park Service releases detailed guide on what visitors should do upon encountering squirrel. We've published a step-by-step guide urging guests to remain absolutely still and try to make themselves appear big by spreading their feet if they ever happen upon a squirrel in the wild, said Park Service Wildlife Management Deputy Director Dan Smith. Movies such as Ice Age would have you believe squirrels are friendly, mischievous at worst, with absolutely no thirst for human blood. So how do we check? How do we verify this story? We've got some great, all of the suggestions that have come up so far would definitely apply here. Any other things we can do in this case? So again, there are a lot of different ways we could approach this. Both of the previous steps might well be useful. So it's possible that a fact checker might have taken a look at this story. We do want to make sure always that this story is from the original source. So we want to go through the article and make sure that it's not coming from somewhere else. But this is an example of verifying the source. Once we know what this original source is, then we need to take steps to verify it, to find out if it's reliable or not. So in some cases, like with The Guardian, if you're familiar with it, then you don't necessarily need to verify it. But if you aren't, and of course, a lot of people aren't, when you see something from a newspaper from another city, from another country, you don't necessarily know whether it's reliable or not. You don't necessarily know. If I ask you, what's the main English language newspaper of Victoria, British Columbia? Maybe you don't know. So we have to verify it if we're not familiar with it. So in this case, our original source is The Onion. And so we simply do a Google search for it, and we see The Onion is an American satirical digital media company and newspaper organization that publishes articles on international, national, and local news. But the important thing is satirical. So we see there that this is not a real newspaper. It's not a real news source. Everything in it is satire. And it's coming from Wikipedia. Now, Wikipedia sometimes gets a bad rep because it is true that it's written and edited by volunteers, and that many articles can be edited by any users or even anonymously. Now, that's not true, incidentally, about the articles that are controversial or articles that are part of the news. Those articles often get locked so that only registered editors can change them. But even when it is true, we can see that Wikipedia has some pretty powerful mechanisms built in for trying to avoid misinformation. So an example here is the Wikipedia article for the house hippo. So let's say that we saw househippofoundation.org. Maybe you didn't already know that house hippos aren't real. And so you go to Wikipedia and you look up house hippo. But what if someone had changed house hippo, the house hippo website? Well, one thing to be aware of is that articles that are not considered to be fully reliable in every way have what are called warning banners. So here are two examples of articles with warning banners, and you can see that some of them just tell you to be a little bit cautious. So the first one says, this article needs additional citations for verification. So that means the article could be better, but there's no reason to think it isn't reliable. The second one says, this article does not cite any sources. So that's an article that tells us, that warning banner tells us, probably not great to rely on that article. Doesn't mean it's not true. The article on Gustav Kneip, German composer and conductor, may be entirely accurate, but because it doesn't have sources cited, we can't count on it. Another way that we can verify a Wikipedia article is by taking a look at the talk page. So the talk page is where editors discuss the topic. So if there's a lot of disagreement about an article, if an article is still under development, it'll show it to us. And in this case, there's not a whole lot. It's for the house hippo, it's what's called a stub. So the article could be expanded, but there's no reason to think that it's not reliable. We can also look at the revision history. Now, again, you don't necessarily want to dig through this, but the important thing about revision history is to find out whether things are changing really rapidly. So if you see that there are changes that are being made and reverted really quickly, if there's been 100 changes made in the last 2 days, it's an evidence that, again, you want to give it a little more time before fully trusting it. In this case, the house hippo one hasn't really been changed since last May. It's pretty settled. So we know it's probably reliable. And in fact, we can see that one of the times that it's been changed has been to remove false and misleading information. What was that misinformation? Well, back in May of 2020, someone changed it to treat the house hippo as a real animal. The house hippo is an animal native to Canada, and that was reverted, as you can see, almost immediately. That change was made at 2:08, and it was reverted at 2:41. So that's why, in general, if we know how to use Wikipedia, if we know that an article, to check the talk page, if we know to look for warning banners, most Wikipedia articles are actually reliable. They're reliable for getting a context, for finding out, generally speaking, whether something exists. All right, here's one more example. This is the glass frog. You might see this on Instagram. Could this be true? A frog that is see-through, so see-through you can actually see all of its internal organs. How would we check? Isn't that cool? So this is where we get to checking other sources. So we've had this suggested in a variety of other ways by people in the chat, looking to see whether other subjects or other sources cover it. And in particular, we want to find out, do reliable sources check it? So we want to look for a source that we know is reliable. Let's say the actual National Geographic, not the fake one. We go to National Geographic, we put in glass frog, And we see, yeah, it's real. And we can follow that, read the article. We've also created another custom search engine. It's bit.ly/science-search, and it searches a whole bunch of different science sources at different levels, different reading levels. And it's a great way of finding out if something that you've just read about, whether it's true or not, and particularly finding out what the scientific consensus is. Because a lot of times we won't be looking for something as specific as, do frogs exist, or do glass frogs exist? We're going to be looking for, well, what do people generally think? What do scientists generally think about a particular topic? Similarly, we've also created a news search. Now, most search engines have a news tab that you can use. That is generally a better way of looking for news than the general search, but we also have a news search that you can use that searches a bunch of reliable sources, again, to find out if something is really happening. And if we use the science search, we see that there are lots of different sources: Nature, Scientific American, Canadian Geographic, New Scientist, Science Mag. All of them agree that, yes, this frog exists, and it is pretty cool. So those are 4 simple ways that you can verify information, whether it's about animals or not, although animals are always the most fun. We have a time for a couple of questions.
Hi, Matthew. There's just 2 more questions here.
Awesome.
One, can you share the facting check tool link again, please? The one that checks multiple sites at once.
Yes, so I can share them all in the chat. So there's the fact search, the news search, and the science search. And all of these are available as well if you go to breakthefake.ca. All of those are included in some of the tip sheets that we have there that take a look at our different 4 steps for verifying online information.
Thank you. And one more question. Why did you make this video? Why should it matter?
Why does it matter? Wow. But you know what? It matters because for most of us, the internet is where we get information. And because it is vitally important that the information that we get and that we share is reliable. And I think if the last 6 months have shown us anything, it's that there are so many times when we make decisions about our lives, about our health, about politics when we're old enough, but there are times when we gather information for school, for work, for so many different contexts. And because it is so easy for anyone to make and share content online, we absolutely have to be vigilant. And we have to take that basic media literacy step of questioning what we see and of reminding ourselves that what we see was created. So even in a reliable source, even when you're reading something from National Geographic or the New York Times, or when we're reading something on Wikipedia, we do have to remember it was made by people. Those people made decisions about what to include, what to leave out. They made decisions about what's important and what isn't. And those decisions are part of the final product that we see. And that's why, for instance, checking other sources can be so valuable, because looking at maybe 3 different or 4 different news articles about the same story can often give us a much fuller idea about what really happened. And that's one of the great strengths of Wikipedia, is that it's because it's written in conversation and written by consensus. A lot of times it includes a wider range of points of view and a wider range of facts than a traditional encyclopedia might. All right, and I guess that's our last question. So thank you, everyone. Once again, I encourage you to check out breakthefake.ca and do check out househippofoundation.org. You can share it with your friends and see if they what they make of it, whether they recognize all of the different weak signals there. And you can challenge them to find out whether house hippos are real or not. And so from all of us at Media Smarts and from the House Hippo, thank you all and happy Media Literacy Week.